Who's ready to catch some salmon and steelhead? In today's video, we will talk about rules and regulation, my setup. I will give you an in-depth look inside of my tackle box. We will also talk about my rods and reels, as well as the line I use to target salmon and steelhead. We will talk about locations and when to fish. So to get started, I just want to say this video will be fairly Idaho-based since that is where I target salmon and steelhead. In Idaho, each body of water has a very specific set of rules and regulations on catching salmon and steelhead. Each body of water has its own limit and own seasons for each individual species, and it is a very good idea to be up to date and knowledgeable about the current limits and seasons for that body of water that you are fishing. These are dependent on the number of fish coming into that body of water, as well as the harvest reports obtained by Idaho Fish and Game throughout the season. Linked below will be Idaho Fish and Game's salmon and steelhead rules and regulations. Go check that out. One important factor for catching salmon and steelhead is to know what you're catching. So let's talk about fish identification real quick. So Chinook salmon, king salmon, have a black mouth, black gums, and spots along their entire tail fin. Steelhead are more easily identifiable than the other two. They have a white mouth, white gums, and spots on their entire tail fin. But they look more like an oversized rainbow trout. And when they get colored up, it is fairly easy to tell them apart. You know, the red streak along them and the greenish olive colored back. Now, coho salmon. Coho salmon have black mouth, white gums, whereas Chinook have all black mouth. They have spots only on the upper half of their tail fin. When these fish are fresh in the water, they will all be fairly silver and chromed up, so it'll be a little difficult to tell. But once they start spawning, coho salmon, for example, get pretty obvious since they develop a large kype on their upper jaw and kind of start to get more of an olivish greenish head with a red body. Chinook salmon start to get a mottled reddish color throughout their body when they start to spawn, and steelhead become a very vibrant red, and they have very red cheekbones. So I will also link below a little pamphlet for fish identification for you guys to check out. So let's talk about the setup. There are many productive setups for catching salmon and steelhead. The first one I'm going to talk about is not a method I use often, but it is very successful. I just don't have patience. Bobber fishing or float fishing, which pretty much is exactly what it sounds like. You have your main line coming down to a sliding bobber. That's a bobber, believe it or not. To your bobber, down to could be a sliding weight or a pencil weight attached to a swivel, and that goes to a barrel swivel. That's a barrel swivel too, which then goes to your leader. Typically for my main line, I use a very heavy braid or mono, like a 50-pound, somewhere between 30 and 50-pound main line. For this leader, I use typically a fluorocarbon or a mono, since you want something low vis that the fish won't easily see, right? Typically, just like with all leaders, probably about an arm's length, 2 to 3 feet for your leader. Now this leader goes down to your hook. And most riverways in Idaho require you to use a barbless hook. It's just a good rule of thumb anyhow. Typically you want to use probably a 1/0, 2/0, maybe even a 3/0 sized hook. And what you choose to bait this hook all kind of depends up to you. I will just kind of rattle off baits. I won't go into great detail, but salmon roe is a good bait, as well as steelhead roe. Or sand shrimp or coon shrimp, also good options. Or even using a jig. They make plenty of aerial style jigs for targeting salmon and steelhead. You want to use these with a bobber. You could also use what is called a yarny, which is simply taking a little piece of yarn and adding a scent to it, whether that be an anise scent, a sand shrimp scent, or a rose scent. Well, so that's kind of bobber fishing. You know, you have your sliding sinker, which is on your main line attached with your bobber. You're probably going to want a bobber stop. That'd be a good idea too. And where you set that bobber stop all depends on the body of water you're fishing. If your bobber's leaning forward and dragging, you want to bring your bobber stop down. If it's leaning backwards and just kind of going really fast, you want to bring your bobber stop up. You know, lengthen how deep you're fishing. So that pretty much covers bobber fishing. So we'll slide into another method that's very similar to bobber fishing. It's called drift fishing or bottom bouncing, which pretty much you just take the bobber out of the equation as well as the bobber stop. You have your main line directly attached to a sinker. And whether you use a sliding sinker that is pegged somehow, or you use some surgical tubing and a T-sinker to a pencil weight, both will work just as well. Pencil weights are kind of nice since if you're not quite sure how to gauge the water, you can put on a large chunk of pencil weight, throw it out there. If it's dragging a lot, you can just cut a little bit more off and your weight's smaller. Whereas if you're using a fixed weight, you kind of have to, well, if you're using too heavy, you got to take that whole thing off, go lighter, or vice versa. If you're too light, you got to go heavier. But you can use pretty much the same bait to hook setup, whether it be salmon roe, coon shrimp, sand shrimp. Probably wouldn't use a weighted jig since you already have weight and your jig would just be dragging. But yarnies also would work well. But that's the drift setup, and you cast that out. You can cast upstream, but you want to keep your line tight if you're casting upstream. And then when it gets downstream, you kind of want to be able to let line out as you go. And bobber fishing is a lot like fly fishing. You want to mend your line. You don't want to be creating a big bow. I use a heavy braid, a high vis braid, so that I can see what my line's doing if I'm bobber fishing. If it's creating a big bend, I'll mend that upstream and let it float back down. Well, so we talked about bobber fishing and float fishing. Let's talk about the fun ways to catch salmon and steelhead. Twitching. Twitching is one of my favorite ways to catch salmon. Twitching was originally meant specifically for coho salmon, and twitching jigs do catch coho salmon, but they also catch chinook and steelhead. And I have proof at the beginning of this video. So with twitching, you usually do not want to cast upstream. So say this is you standing here with your rod in your hand, and this is the river flowing like so. We'll say that's downstream. You do not want to cast upstream. Maybe slightly upstream, like a 15-degree angle, but typically you should probably cast straight out. And what you're going to do is you're going to let it drift, and it's going to drift like so. But as it drifts, once you're pretty confident that it's near the bottom, you want to give it a pop. Go from about waist high to above head height. Reel back down, make sure that line's tight, give it a second to sink to the bottom again, give it a pop. And do that all the way down to about 90 degrees. Then reel back in, cast back out. What you're doing by letting it sink down is you're getting it right below where those fish would be, and then you're popping it up. The salmon or steelhead are going to see that fast action and think it's a threat to, you know, their future eggs. So they're going to strike out just habitually. So if you're casting out, when you're casting out, I guess I should say, you want to change how far you're casting. You don't want to start by casting clear across the river. You should start small, bite more off as you go, and keep, let it drift, pop, let it drift, pop. If you're not catching anything, not having any luck, take a couple steps down the river. Rinse, wash, repeat. Just keep doing that. Still not catching anything, maybe change your colors up a little bit. But if you don't want to go buy twitching jigs, I recently posted a video on how to tie your own, and that should be linked right about here. You can go check it out. Typically, I like to tie my jigs in contrasting colors. A bright and a dark. So, for example, a chartreuse and a black, or a pink and a purple, something along those lines. But fairly straightforward. Depending on the depth and speed of the water you're fishing, you're going to want somewhere between a 3/8 ounce jig, maybe even up to a 1 ounce jig. Just kind of depends on the body of water you're fishing. So that kind of is a brief overview of twitching for salmon. Let's talk about another fun method of catching salmon. Spinners. Spinner fishing is a wonderful way to catch salmon. Very similar to using twitching jigs. Probably don't ever want to cast up in this area. You want to cast straight out and let it drift down. But as it's drifting down, you should be reeling just fast enough you feel that blade spinning. And if you're not sure that you're on the bottom, a good way to know if you're not on the bottom is you're not snagging up occasionally. You need to go heavier with your spinner. But same as twitching. Cast out, slow reel that back. Not catch anything, take a couple steps down river. Keep rinse, wash, repeat. Keep doing the same thing over and over again. Well, that was a pretty good overview on 4 different setups that I would use for salmon fishing. Let's take a look inside of my tackle boxes, shall we? So, we are over here on my tying bench, and I have 2 of my tackle boxes set up. On the top here, I have a box that is so full of twitching jigs I can't even hardly close it. But up here, on top of this box, I have some that I recently tied. As you can see, I use a light and a dark color pattern. I have, these are 1/2 ounce and these are 3/8 ounce jigs. In this box, I have everything from 3/8 ounce up to 1 ounce. Below that, right here, I have my spinner and spoon tackle box. 2 of my most favorite types of spinners to use would be a Blue Fox or a Vibrex spinner, probably in a 5 or a 6 size, and a Flash and Glow. Flash and Glows are basically budget Blue Foxes, and I love them. I've caught the most salmon on a Flash and Glow. I also have a spinner that I made to kind of mimic a Flash and Glow when I couldn't really afford to buy spinners. I will also have a video on YouTube that I might link to this on how to make your own as well. I also have this crocodile spoon. Another great way, pretty similar to using spinners, but if you would like to hear more about using spoons, please leave a comment below and I might make a separate video. So, those were 2 of my tackle boxes that I take with me when I go salmon fishing. I also have this monstrosity. Now, forgive me, this tackle box has been out many a time and has not seen... It's seen some rough days, to say. On the top, I have some Brad's Wigglers. Mostly only use those when I'm fishing out of a boat, but this video is focusing on bank fishing. But below, as always, I have some miscellaneous beads, some egg beads for using with a drift or a bobber setup. I have a variety of 1/0, 2/0, and 3/0 hooks in here, as well as some 2 ounce to 3/4 weights, and just kind of a smorgasbord of bobbers. And with bobbers, you want to size your bobber to the weight that you're using. I also have, as you can see, some fluorocarbon in here for tying leaders. Typically, I would stick to a 40 or 50 pound. This roll of 15 pound is more in here, more or less as a emergency situation. I also have a good pair of forceps in here, some 3/4 ounce sliding weights. In the bottom here is where I have most of the stuff I would use. I have some glow bug yarn for tying yarnies. I have that in orange as well as a chartreuse. Both of those have seen better days. I also have oodles of surgical tubing for tying on pencil lead. And just some more miscellaneous stuff. I have some salmon worms, which you can use either drift fishing or bobber fishing. But yeah, this box, I don't use it as much. I definitely prefer to fish twitching jigs or spinners. Well, those are my tackle boxes. Let's get back to talking about rods and reels. So, what rods and reels do I use? Well, if you've seen my sturgeon video, you know I like to keep it simple. Can't go wrong with ugly stick. This is an ugly stick GX2 in a medium heavy. It's the combo setup, and on this reel I have some 50-pound spider wire braid. But this rod I mostly use for twitching or throwing spinners, and for a whopping total of $40, it has caught me well over 30 fish. Now, if I'm bobber fishing, though, you probably want something a little longer that you can mend. The ugly stick is only about a 6'6" rod. This is a Shimano Claris, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, with a Shimano Sahara reel on it. This is a size 4000 reel. This is my main bobber or drift fishing rod. You want that longer rod so you can mend your line easier when you're drift or float fishing. I think this is it's an 8 foot something rod, but probably says on it. But I also have, this is a 55-pound braid in a bright yellow, high vis color that I can see so I can easily mend. All right, so that was rods and reels. But where do you go to catch salmon? Well, you got to go to the water. Like I was saying in my sturgeon video, you kind of want to look for that fast water with a deep pocket, or just some sort of structure or an impasse that those salmon are going to want to stage up behind before they have to expend a lot of energy. So if you find some fast water with a deep pocket or pool, where those salmon and steelhead are going to stage up, they're going to hang out for a minute before they go up it. That is a great place to use spinners and spoons. And you kind of want to be, right on the end of that fast water going into that pocket when you cast out. You want to be casting straight out into that tail water. And as you catch it, be reeling back slowly with your spinner, or, twitching, popping up and down with your twitching jig. That is one of the best places to, a good location on a river body to find salmon and steelhead. If that's not an option, below large structures, dams. I mean, if a fish is traveling upriver, it's not going to make it up above the dam unless there's a fish ladder. But like with that deep pocket and fast water, it's going to have to stage up if it is going above a dam. So that's kind of a good location. You also don't want to be, if you're finding this like mile-long stretch of river that's just ripping, you don't really want to fish that, because salmon and steelhead are going to take the path of least resistance. If they're going through shallow, fast water, they're going to cruise on by. They're not going to hang out. You want to find a spot where those salmon and steelhead are going to stick around for a little while. And that's a good place to fish. But if you can't, if you are in that fast water, fish all day. You might get one as they're coming by. So yeah, look for a good pool or pocket, fish that. But when to fish? Well, as I talked about earlier, you got to fish in season. Fish game doesn't get too happy if you're fishing out of season. It is illegal to target salmon or steelhead out of season. But time of day, there is definitely a morning bite and a night bite. So I like to get up super early before it gets light, be rigged, ready to go. And, as soon as you get to legal fishing hours, 30 minutes before sunrise, start fishing. The same goes in the evening. Oh, it's starting to get dark. You're thinking about picking it up. Don't. Keep fishing. Because those are two, prime times to catch salmon and steelhead. Well, I think that just about covers the topics today. So, with what you know, double check Idaho Fishing Game's rules and regulations before you go fishing. I will have links down in the below for rules and regulations. I will also include some links for some of the tackle I use, as well as that video for twitching jigs. But go catch some steelhead, get out there, and go find out. Thank you. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. If you didn't like this video, tell me why, leave a comment. If you have any questions, leave a comment. We'll see you in 2 weeks. If you want a specific video, leave a comment for that. Thank you, and go find out.